and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be the first in what I hope will be quite an interesting series in which I explore the various counties of England, of which there are many, through works of literature that are primarily set in those places. Now, obviously, one author's interpretation of a county is definitely not going to give a full picture of the county, particularly if, as is the case for today's vlog, the book was set in 1890 something, so clearly not entirely a very accurate representation of the modern day county. But considering before I moved here at the end of 2019, a lot of my preconceptions about England and the UK more broadly were formed through literature. I think it's a reasonable start to understanding the place, and one day when there are no more travel restrictions about how far I can go, I'm keen to go visiting all the counties I read about and inform my own impressions. So, today's book that I'm talking to you about is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. I happened to buy this from a charity shop, I think in about August last year, so it sat on my bookshelf for quite a while before I was able to get to it because I had a lot of things on my to be read pile and I knew it was going to be interesting, but I wasn't compelled to get reading. So I started it at the end of January and finished it mid-Feb. I read about 4 or 5 books at one go, so that's no comment on its speediness or lack thereof. It's just that at different times different books were pulling me in different directions. So I'm going to read you the blurb quickly. London, 1893. When Cora Seaborn's husband dies, she steps into her new life as a widow, with as much relief as sadness. Retreating to the countryside with her son, she encounters rumours of the Essex Serpent, a creature of folklore said to have returned to roam the marshes. Cora is enthralled, believing it may be an undiscovered species. Setting out on its trail, she collides with William Ransom, Old Winter's vicar, who thinks the cure for hysteria lies in faith, while Cora is convinced that science offers the answers. Despite disagreeing on everything, he and Cora find themselves drawn together, changing each other's lives in unexpected ways. Told with grace and intelligence, the Essex Serpent is set in an age of exhilarating and alarming change. But it is, above all, a celebration of love in all its incarnations, and of what we share, even when we disagree. So, with that as the blurb, my initial impression was that it was going to be quite a lot more about romance than about anything else, so I approached it as if I were reading a romance novel. We'll see how that went for me. I just want to tell you a little bit now about Sarah Perry. So, Sarah Perry, the author of The Essex Serpent, has written 4 books so far. She was born in Chelmsford, which is a city in Essex. It's important. Essex plays quite a role in her novels, also I've gathered. So her first book was called After Me Comes the Flood. Then came The Essex Serpent, which won a whole whack of prizes, including British Book Awards and the Waterstones Book of the Year 2016 award. So one of the most memorable historical novels of the past decade, says the Sunday Times, so clearly much acclaim. Then her next book was called Melmoth. Her new book is called Essex Girls, and I'll admit I've not read it yet. It came out in October last year. What I find particularly cool about it is that it's a book about misconceptions about what it is to be an Essex girl. Now, as someone who's not grown up in the UK, most of my appreciation of Essex girls comes from very vague understandings of shows like The Only Way is Essex, so it's all about sort of quite brash, provocative young women. And Sarah Perry wants to rewrite the story about how we perceive Essex girls and think about that as a category of womanhood, and I think that that's quite a cool project because clearly Essex girls would be run down by the public because we all know the public doesn't really deal so well with confident women who own their sexuality. So I think that that's going to be an interesting read, and I'd rather read that to find out more about modern Essex than I would watch The Only Way is Essex. But you know, all in the name of research, I suppose. I knew pretty much nothing about Essex when I was going into this book for the first time. And as I said, reading something set in the late Victorian era is probably not the clearest mirror to hold up to today's Essex. I did a little bit of reading about Essex that was in the past. Thanks Wikipedia, you're the best. And things that I've learned was that Essex was originally the kingdom of the East Saxons, so East Saxons, Essex, that's how it got there. It was founded by a king called Esquine in AD 527, so it's got a long history. It was one of the 7 traditional kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, which is 7 kingdoms in Greek. So very, very Game of Thrones. It's like very medieval, like pre-medieval actually. Very Game of Thrones, though lol, I should probably read those before I talk about them. Yeah, I'm probably actually going to watch those rather than read those because George R.R. Martin seems to be stuck on writing the last book, and I'm hesitant to get into another epic fantasy series that the author is kind of refusing to finish. Anyway, back to the point. The 7 kingdoms from the original heptarchy were East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Mercia, Northumbria, Sussex and Wessex. So, like, Essex is very old. It had a pre-Roman history, then it had a Roman history. Colchester, which is one of the biggest cities in Essex, was the capital of Roman Britain. And when I kind of twigged that, I had these vague, like, memories of reading a book set in Roman Britain, which then I went and searched for teenager/young adult books set in Roman Britain, and I've realised that there's a series called The Warriors of Alavna that I read when I must have been about 13 that I've absolutely totally loved, and now it's on my reading list. And my husband gave me a Kindle for my birthday, and this is totally enabling my extraneous reading habits, but hey, that's fine. So after the Roman phase, there was the Norman conquest, that was 1066, and then there's kind of like, the Wikipedia page basically has a big gap from the Norman period to the Victorian era, so like, it seems like nothing happened between 1066-ish and the 1840s when the railways came to Essex. So the railways came to Essex and they brought a big change to how life, the universe and everything worked. Suddenly people could get there, suddenly goods and services could get back into the centre. London was obviously the capital and quite a main focal point. So that's kind of the context for where we are now. Cora and her husband, who then died, lived in London, and then when she's widowed, she decides that she's able to be free and go and explore. So she was out to try and find some fossils, and that would have been very interesting. Cora as a character is very much a rationalist. She's science-based. She wants to know about the mysteries of the world, but through a microscope. She wants to understand things from their scientific first principles. She goes to Old Winter to get out of London, and she bumps into Reverend William Ransom, who is not at all the stuffy country parson she has built up in her mind when the letters say, "Hi, I'm going to come to your town." Then again, when he receives a letter from the widow Cora Seaborn, he pictures her as a sort of steely-haired, frumpy 60-something-year-old lady who's definitely not the young widow that she turns out to be. It's a novel that's told over a number of months, so the months are divisions in the books. It's also told interspersed with a series of letters, so there's a bit of an epistolary novel aspect to it. Letters between Cora and Luke Garrett, who's a doctor in London, who's a genius surgeon, and William Ransom, and Cora's companion Martha, and there are bits and pieces written by William Ransom's wife Stella. So when I realised that like William Ransom was actually a married man, I had this moment of, oh dear, this is going to be a bit complicated, and the book actually begins with Luke Garrett, who is the doctor who's looked after Cora's husband throughout his illness, who is also passionately in love with her. So there's lots of love triangles set up in the book, and not all of it pans out quite the way you expect, which is great. So obviously the title, the Essex Serpent, the big intrigue. What exactly is the Essex Serpent? There's a bit of mass hysteria in the town, as hinted at by the blurb. Basically, the community is convinced that there is a sea monster living in the Blackwater River, which is one of the big marshy estuaries in Essex. When the tide goes out, it's quite walkable, I think. But when the tide comes in, if you get stuck out there, then you could be stuck in the middle of nowhere without a boat to come and save you. There's kind of this challenge between Cora, who is quite convinced that the Essex Serpent is not only real, but actually a still living prehistoric animal, a new species as it were, and then William Ransom, who thinks it's a figment of people's imagination. Then their sort of bantery interactions are a little problematic, because you're like, okay, cool, we've got this Cora Will thing set up, but William's wife is lovely. She's a beautiful person. She's inside and out. She's caring, she's kind, she looks after him and his children, and she loves Cora. She just thinks that Cora is the best thing since sliced bread. So it's really uncomfortable, because you kind of like as a reader, you like the sparring between Will and Cora and their like rationalist versus life of faith argument, but at the same time you don't want them to come in between Will and Stella, because Stella's just such a beautiful character. So that sort of challenging combination of Luke Garrett, Cora, Will, Stella, and then spinning around the other characters like Cora's son Francis, and her companion Martha, interspersing life between London and Essex, rural Essex. It's complex. I think Sarah Perry's written very engaging characters in quite engaging setting. I get the sense that I'd like to walk along some country roads in Essex, though I'm sure that there are quite different country roads in the 21st century to the late 1890s. It's also being filmed as a TV series, which is something I'm quite excited about. I'm keen to see how they treat the characters and how they deal with the challenges of those interpersonal relationships. And you know, I'm a big fan of historical dramas and historical TV, so I'll be keen to see that. Originally, Keira Knightley was cast as Cora Seaborn, so I think that would have been a very good casting call, despite the fact that Cora is supposed to be kind of not what you expect of a well-bred widow. She doesn't give attention to her hair and appearance, and she wears an old outsized man's coat and big muddy boots, and I feel like Keira Knightley is quite a pretty human, so that might have been a bit of a challenge to rough her up a bit to make her look appropriate. But then she's actually pulled out of the filming due to ongoing childcare problems during COVID, and is being replaced by Claire Danes, which I think is quite a clever replacement, though I think Claire Danes is also very pretty, so might have the same problem. Anyway, I'm going to find it very interesting to see how they do that rationalist faith argument throughout the novel, and how they make it as compelling between William Ransom and Cora without making it too much of a drastic love triangle, which it could be. Throughout the book, I never really felt like the love triangle was... It didn't feel gross and icky. It didn't feel like cheating, even when... Spoiler alert, even when Will and Cora do actually kind of have sex, it's like, as much as they both reflect on the guilt of that process, Will's wife Stella has quite severe consumption at that stage, so she's probably going to die quite soon, and it's not quite as gross as it could have been. I don't know, it's very weird. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the tension. I think it was adequately tense without being too on the nose. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they handle that. I'm also really looking forward to visiting the Blackwater, to seeing what Essex is like nowadays, to go for some muddy walks along some banks and have a look and see if I can see the Essex Serpent, a big winged scaly beast that may or may not be there.